So they're conducting this big operation, and they're inserting by helicopter, and Puller gets in on the ground, inserted from the helicopter. Everyone's on the ground now, and here we go. I concentrated as best I could on making certain that the two squads to my left were online and in position to hook up with the platoon adjacent to them. But in the confusion and noise from the other helicopter around us, control was almost impossible. The skipper's position was to be atop the high bluff to our right, overlooking VM Dong, where we had camped the night before. After I had gotten my men online, my next assignment was to connect with his location. Watson followed closely in my tracks with the radio, but the two nearest men to us were at least 20 meters away on the other side, and for all intents and purposes, out of hearing range. As we maneuvered, I scanned the area to my immediate front, which I had been neglecting in my effort to maintain platoon integrity. Suddenly I saw a squad of green uniformed North Vietnamese soldiers begin running out of the village and in my direction. They had apparently panicked when the helicopters began landing and were now probing for a way out of the noose we were drawing around them. As they advanced toward me, I was unable to get the attention of the Marines near me, and it dawned on me, to my horror, that I was the only obstacle between them and freedom. I raised my rifle to my shoulder and attempted to draw a bead on the lead soldier, but my first bullet was off the mark, and when I pulled the trigger for a second time, my rifle jammed. By now, the North Vietnamese soldiers had spotted me, and several of them fired wildly in my direction until they abruptly altered their advance and veered off to my left. Standing alone with a malfunctioning weapon and 7 enemy soldiers bearing down on me, I was at once seized by a fear that was palpable and all-encompassing. My throat became dry as parchment, and beads of perspiration popped out on my forehead before coursing down my face. I turned abruptly with Watson in tow and ran as fast as I could toward the safety of the bluffs above VM Dong, where the company headquarters party was to be located. A narrow trail led up the hill to the headquarters group, and as I approached, it never occurred to me that the 30 meters between my course and the commander's position had not been secured. I knew only that the firepower advantage of the NVA squad I had just encountered would be neutralized if I could reach the men milling at the crest of the hill. With only a few meters left to cover in my flight, a thunderous boom suddenly rent the air, and I was propelled upward with the acrid smell of cordite in my nostrils. When I landed a few feet up the trail from the booby-trapped howitzer round that I had detonated, I felt as if I had been airborne forever. Colors and sound became muted, and although there was now a beehive of activity all around me, all movement seemed to be in slow motion. I initially thought that the loss of my glasses in the explosion accounted for my blurred vision, and I had no idea that the pink mist that engulfed me had been caused by the vaporization of most of my right and left legs. As shock began to numb my body, I could see through a haze of pain that my right thumb and little finger were missing, as was most of my left hand, and I could smell the charred flesh which extended from my right wrist upward to the elbow. I knew that I had finished serving my time in the hell of Vietnam. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I felt elated at the prospect of relinquishing my command and going home to my wife and unborn child. I did not understand why Watson, who was the first man to reach me, kept screaming, "Pray, Lieutenant, for God's sake, pray." I could not see the jagged shards of flesh and bone that had only moments before been my legs. And I did not realize until much later that I had been forever set apart from the rest of humanity. For the next hour, a frantic group of Marines awaited the medevac chopper that was my only hope of deliverance and worked at keeping me alive. Doc Ellis knelt beside my broken body and with his thumbs kept my life from pouring out into the sand until a tourniquet fashioned from a web belt was tied around my left stump and a towel was pressed tightly into the hole where my right thigh had joined my torso. My watch and rifle were destroyed by the blast and my flak jacket was in tatters. But I did manage to turn my undamaged maps of the command of the platoon over to Corporal Turner during one of my lucid intervals. I also gave explicit orders to all the Marines and corpsmen hovering around me that my wife was not to be told of my injuries until after the baby was born. There was, of course, no possibility of compliance with my command, but the Marines ministering to me assured me that my wishes would be honored. Because we were on a company-sized operation, there were 6 corpsmen in the immediate area around Viêm Dong, and each of them carried a supply of blood expanders, which were designed to stabilize blood pressure until whole blood could be administered. As word spread of my injuries, each of the company's corpsmen passed expanders to Doc Ellis, who used up the last of them while my men slapped at my face to try and get me to drink water and held cigarettes to my lips in an attempt to keep me awake. When the chopper finally arrived, I was placed on a stretcher and gently carried to its entrance, where a helmeted crew chief and medevac surgeon helped me aboard. Someone had located my left boot, which still contained its bloody foot, and that too was placed on the stretcher with me. As the chopper began its race towards the triage of Naval Support Hospital in Da Nang, I was only moments from death, but I remember thinking clearly before losing consciousness that I was going to make it. I never again saw the 3rd Platoon of Gulf Company, a remarkable group of young men with whom I had had the most intense male relationships of my life, and I felt guilty for years that I had abandoned them before our work was finished. I was to feel even worse that I was glad to be leaving them, and that in my mind I had spent my last healthy moments in Vietnam running from the enemy. I came to feel that I had failed to prove myself worthy of my father's name. And broken in spirit as well as body, I was going to have to run a different gauntlet.